Welcome back to the Grimdark Archives. There is a legion that built the Imperium's greatest fortresses, then tore them down to prove they could. There is a legion that bled more than any other, died more than any other, and was thanked less than any of them. There is a legion whose father looked upon the golden walls of the Emperor's palace and felt nothing but the urge to calculate their breaking points. There is a legion that did not fall to chaos out of rage or sorrow or wounded pride, but out of something colder, something more human, the absolute corroding certainty that none of it mattered, that sacrifice without recognition is not nobility, it is waste. They are the Iron Warriors, and their story is not about betrayal. It is about what happens when loyalty is never once rewarded, and the man holding the wall finally asks himself why he's holding it at all. Let me take you back to a world called Olympia. Not a death world, not a feral hunting ground or a techno-barbaric sprawl. Olympia was civilized. It had city-states, petty tyrants, mountain fortresses carved into granite by generations of warlords who understood that survival meant walls. It was a world of sieges, a world where war was not a sudden, ecstatic thing, but a long, grinding arithmetic. Resources against time, stone against iron, patience against patience. Into this world fell a Primarch, and the world shaped him completely. Perturabo did not land among savages. He landed among engineers, among strategists, among men who understood that war was labor, and that the deepest truth of conflict was logistical, not romantic. He was adopted by the tyrant of Lochos, Dammekos, and here's what you need to understand about that relationship, because it seeds everything that comes after. Dammekos did not love Perturabo. Dammekos used him. He saw a weapon of extraordinary intellect, a mind that could look at any fortification and simply know where it would fail, and he pointed that weapon at his rivals. Perturabo conquered Olympia's city-states not out of passion, but out of duty, because this was the role assigned to him, and he performed it with merciless, mechanical excellence, and no one celebrated him for it. That detail matters. Picture the young Perturabo, a being of staggering intellect. He could design machines centuries beyond his world's capability. He could compose, calculate, create. There are accounts that suggest he built architectural wonders, devices of breathtaking intricacy, things of genuine beauty. But Olympia did not want a creator. Olympia wanted a conqueror. So the creator learned to bury the parts of himself that built things, and fed the parts of himself that broke them. He did this because it was what was asked of him. And when the Emperor finally arrived, descending from the stars like the answer to a question Perturabo had carried his entire life, the Lord of Iron must have believed, for one searing moment, that he would finally be seen, that someone would look at him and recognize not just the siegebreaker, but the architect, the maker, the sun. The Emperor did not do this. The Emperor saw exactly what Dammekos had seen, a tool for the hardest work. And the hardest work of the Great Crusade was not glory. It was attrition. Here's the thing nobody talks about. The Iron Warriors were not given the campaigns that made legends. They were not unleashed on worthy foes in wars that would be remembered. They were given the meat grinders, the static sieges, the dug-in Xenos empires that could only be cracked by feeding men into the breach until the breach collapsed. The compliance action so brutal and so prolonged that no iterator would write poems about them. No remembrancer would paint murals. The Iron Warriors were the legion the Imperium sent when something simply had to be destroyed at any cost, and the cost was always the Iron Warriors themselves. Think about what that does to a legion's identity over decades, over a century. They bled at Incaladion. They bled at the castigation of Shravan. They were garrisoned, divided, scattered across compliance zones as fortress builders and garrison holders, while other legions, the Luna Wolves, the Emperor's Children, the Ultramarines, won the wars that the Imperium would celebrate. Perturabo's sons became the Imperium's bricklayers and gravediggers, and every time they looked to their father for reassurance, for some sign that this suffering had meaning, they found a Primarch who had already internalized the same lesson. Suffering had no meaning. It was simply what was expected. Let me be precise about this, because the scale of it gets lost. The Iron Warriors sustained some of the highest casualty rates of any legion during the Great Crusade, not because they were reckless, not because they were poorly led, because they were consistently assigned to the most attritional theaters of war and expected to simply endure. Perturabo developed a practice called decimation, the execution of every 10th legionary in underperforming units. It is remembered as cruelty, and it was cruelty. But I want you to hold something in your mind as we go forward. Decimation was not madness. It was a mirror. Perturabo treated his sons exactly the way the Imperium treated him. Expendable, measurable only in output, valued only insofar as they were useful. He became the thing that was done to him. He passed the wound downward because no one above him would acknowledge it existed. This is the Iron Warriors' tragedy in its most distilled form. They were not ignorant of their condition. They saw it clearly, and clarity, without remedy, is its own kind of poison. Now, there is a moment I need you to see, because it is the fracture point, and it comes before Horus ever whispers a word of rebellion. It comes on Olympia. While Perturabo ground his legion to dust across the galaxy, his homeworld revolted. The people of Olympia, the very people he had conquered and unified, rose up against imperial rule. When word reached Perturabo, something broke, or perhaps something that had been broken for a very long time, finally became visible. He returned to Olympia, and he did not pacify it. He scoured it. The Iron Warriors descended upon their own homeworld and prosecuted a campaign of annihilation so thorough, so methodical, so devoid of restraint that entire cities were reduced to rubble. Millions died, not enemy combatants, Olympians, his people. Here's the detail that changes everything about how we understand this moment. The massacre of Olympia was not strategy. It was not even rage. Not really. Or if it was rage, it was the kind of rage that comes after years of numbness, the sudden hemorrhage of a man who has been bleeding internally for so long, he forgot what pain was supposed to feel like. Perturabo destroyed Olympia because Olympia was the first thing that was ever his, the first thing he was supposed to protect, and it rejected him. Just like Dammekos, just like the Emperor, just like every campaign that consumed his sons and gave nothing back. He could not bear one more rejection delivered to a face that had never once been allowed to show hurt. So he annihilated the source. If Olympia could not be his in loyalty, it would be his in ruin. And when the fires cooled and the silence settled, and the magnitude of what he had done became undeniable, when Perturabo looked across the ashes and understood that he had committed an atrocity indistinguishable from those the Imperium destroyed worlds for, he knew there was no going back. Not because the Emperor would not forgive him. Perhaps the Emperor would have. Perturabo could not forgive himself. And a man who cannot forgive himself will burn everything, rather than sit in the wreckage of what he's become. This is when Horus's rebellion became not an ideology for Perturabo, but an exit. The War Master offered war without pretense, war without the lie of noble purpose, war as honest labor, grim and transactional, which was the only kind of truth Perturabo had ever been allowed to inhabit. He didn't join Horus because he believed in Horus. He joined because it no longer mattered who he believed in. Let me take you forward now, to the war itself. Because the Iron Warriors at war, truly at war, unshackled from loyalty's theater, are something terrible and magnificent to behold. The Horus Heresy gave Perturabo exactly one thing the Great Crusade never had, a worthy adversary who would force the Imperium to see him. And that adversary was Rogel Dorn. Understand the dynamic. Dorn was everything Perturabo was not credited for being: the Praetorian, the Defender, the Emperor's chosen architect of fortification. And the deep, bitter irony, the irony Perturabo carried like shrapnel in his chest, was that he knew he was Dorn's equal, perhaps his superior. He had studied every fortress Dorn ever built. He had broken fortifications that would have stymied any other commander in the Imperium. But the accolades, the recognition, the title of the Emperor's wall builder, those went to Dorn. Always to Dorn. The Siege of Terra was not simply a military campaign for Perturabo. It was a thesis defense. It was the final, apocalyptic proof that he could break anything, including the greatest fortification ever constructed, designed by the brother who had received every honor Perturabo was denied, and he nearly did it. The Iron Warriors at the walls of the Imperial Palace were methodical, relentless, brilliant in their engineering of destruction. They dug trenches through the bones of Terra itself. They calculated fields of fire with inhuman precision. They turned siege warfare into a black science, where the World Eaters threw themselves at the walls in frothing madness, and the sons of Horus struck with surgical aggression. The Iron Warriors simply and systematically dismantled the defenses, layer by layer by layer. They did not need to believe in the cause. They only needed the problem. And the problem was the wall, and the wall could be solved. But here is where the story turns, and it's a turn that most tellings miss. Perturabo was never fully committed to Horus's victory. He was committed to the siege, to the proof, to the work. When the Siege of Terra began to collapse into the chaos-fueled madness of the other traitor legions, when demons poured through breaches alongside legionaries, when the Emperor's children abandoned tactical discipline for Slaneshi excess, when the entire assault devolved from strategy into spiritual corruption, Perturabo recognized what was happening. The war had stopped being a war. It had become a ritual, and rituals serve gods, not men. He withdrew, not in defeat, in disgust. The Iron Warriors pulled back from Terra's walls in fighting order, disciplined and intact, because Perturabo understood with crystalline clarity that the Chaos Gods were not allies, they were employers, and an employee who cannot leave is a slave. This is Perturabo's most overlooked quality, and it reveals something essential about the Iron Warriors as a whole. They were never true believers, not in the imperial truth, not in the Chaos Gods, not in Horus's new order. They were, from first to last, pragmatists trapped in a galaxy that demanded faith. And pragmatism in the Warhammer 40,000 universe is its own kind of damnation, because the universe will not leave you alone. It will force you to choose a god, or it will choose one for you. In the millennia after the heresy, the Iron Warriors retreated into the Eye of Terror and built Medrengard, a demon world forged into a fortress of impossible geometry, a world where every surface is a wall, every valley a kill zone, every horizon a battlement. It is the purest expression of what the Iron Warriors became, a legion that turned inward, that fortified not just their territory, but their identity, that built walls against meaning itself. Perturabo ascended to demon princedom. The accounts vary on how and why and whether he sought it or whether it was imposed upon him. Some sources suggest he constructed a great device, others that he sacrificed his own gene sons in a ritual of grotesque precision. What is consistent is this. Perturabo became the thing he most despised. He became a servant, a tool of the ruinous powers, bound to chaos. Undivided not by devotion, but by the simple, terrible mathematics of power in a universe that will not let you remain neutral. Imagine being Perturabo in that moment, a being who spent 10,000 years refusing to kneel, who joined Horus not out of worship, but out of exhaustion, who withdrew from Terra not out of cowardice, but out of the refusal to become a puppet, and who, in the end, kneels anyway, because the universe gave him no wall strong enough to keep the gods out. This is the Iron Warrior's deepest lesson, and it is not comfortable. In the 41st millennium, The Iron Warriors remain what they have always been. They sell their services as siege specialists to warbands and black crusades. They build and they break. They garrison the dark places. They fight with a cold, professional hatred that has nothing to do with chaos worship and everything to do with the fundamental belief that the galaxy owes them a debt it will never pay. Their warsmiths command grand companies with the efficiency of bitter engineers, not the fervor of cultists. They still bleed more than most. They are still thanked less. Some have splintered. Hansu, the half-breed warsmith born of stolen Imperial Fist gene seed, waged a vendetta against the Ultramarines that burned worlds and broke open the fortress of Hydra Cordatus. His story is personal, vicious, driven by the same need for recognition that consumed his gene-father. Others have turned mercenary in the truest sense, fighting for resources, for slaves, for the raw materials to build the next fortress, because building is the only act that still makes them feel real. And this is where the story gets strange, in the way that only myth can be strange. Because the Iron Warriors are, in some fundamental sense, the most honest faction in the entire setting. They never pretended the galaxy was just. They never wrapped their atrocities in noble language. They never told themselves they were chosen, or righteous, or beloved. They knew the truth from the beginning, that the universe is indifferent, that loyalty is a transaction, that walls fall, and that the only thing a builder can truly control is the next stone he places. They are not tragic because they fell. They are tragic because they saw the fall coming, calculated its exact angle and velocity, and stepped off the edge anyway, because staying was worse. So the next time you read about the Iron Warriors, do not think of them as the bitter ones. Do not think of them as the lesser traitors, the grudge holders, the also-rans of the Horus Heresy. Think of them as the legion that asked the most dangerous question any soldier can ask: why am I fighting? And received no answer. That silence built Medrengard. That silence broke Olympia. That silence still echoes in every trench the Iron Warriors dig, in every wall they raise, in every fortress they tear down, just to prove that nothing in this universe is permanent. Not loyalty, not glory, not even stone. Iron within, iron without, and nothing,